They said the war was over, but in the swamps of Mississippi, chains still rattled. His name was Josiah Holt, a man who'd worn the Union blue, buried his sister, and seen Mercy die in the smoke of the plantations. When the soldiers went home, he stayed behind, with a rifle, a rope, and a promise. No master sleeps easy while one slave still draws breath. Night after night, he rode through the darkness, burning fields, freeing the broken, and hanging the men who called themselves owners. Some said he was a savior. Others called him a monster. Even the Union started whispering his name like a curse, the Dawning Man. But Josiah didn't care what they called him, because once justice learned to ride at dawn, there was no stopping what followed. They hunted him for vengeance. He hunted them for freedom. And by the time the sun rose, over 500 souls had vanished into the light. They ended slavery on paper. He ended it in blood. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Josiah Holt rode slowly down the dirt road, his mule's hooves making soft sounds in the mud. The air smelled of smoke and rain. All around him, the Mississippi Delta showed the scars of war. Burned homes stood like black skeletons against the spring sky. Confederate flags lay half-buried in mud, their stars and bars fading into the earth. Josiah kept his eyes moving, watching for trouble. His time as a Union scout had taught him to see danger before it saw him. His weathered blue coat hung open, hiding the pistol at his waist. The war might be over on paper, but not here. Not in these backwoods where news traveled slow and change traveled slower. 3 days, he whispered to himself, counting the time since he'd heard the rumor about Nash Plantation. 3 days since a trembling old man had told him, "They still got folks in chains there, mister, still working 'em like nothing changed. And among them, maybe Ruth, his sister." The thought of her made Josiah's jaw tighten. The road curved around a stand of cypress trees. Water stood in the ditches, reflecting the cloudy sky. In the distance, Josiah spotted the first cotton fields of Nash Plantation. He slowed his mule to a walk. A white man on horseback watched from the edge of the field. The overseer. He carried a whip coiled at his belt and a shotgun across his lap. When he saw Josiah, he straightened. "You there? This is private property," the man shouted. Josiah kept coming. "I'm looking for Colonel Nash," he called back, his voice calm despite the rage building inside him. Through the fields, he could see figures bent over the rows, black men and women, moving like they always had, like nothing had changed. "Colonel don't see trespassers," the overseer said, hand moving to his shotgun. "Tell him Sergeant Josiah Holt is here about the Emancipation Proclamation," Josiah said. "Tell him I rode with the Massachusetts 54th. The overseer's face twitched with disgust. "Wait here." He wheeled his horse and rode toward the big house that stood on the hill above the fields. Josiah waited, studying the workers. From this distance, he couldn't make out faces. Was Ruth among them? His hands tightened on the reins. It had been almost 8 years since Nash had bought her from their previous owner. 8 years since Josiah had escaped north and joined the Union Army, promising to return for her. The overseer came back with 2 more men, both carrying rifles. "The colonel says you can approach the house, but leave that mule and any weapons here." Josiah slid from his mule and tied it to a fence post. He removed his pistol slowly and placed it in his saddlebag. The 3 white men watched him with hard eyes. "This way," the overseer said. As they walked toward the house, they passed close to the cotton fields. Now Josiah could see the workers clearly. Men and women in tattered clothes, some barefoot despite the sharp plants, and around many ankles, iron shackles glinted in the dim light. A tall woman straightened from her work, pushing back a faded headscarf. Josiah's heart jumped. Ruth, older, thinner, but unmistakably his sister. Their eyes met across the field. She froze, then quickly looked down when the overseer glanced her way. "Keep moving," the man growled at Josiah. Colonel Aubrey Nash waited on the porch of his white-columned house. He sat in a rocking chair like a king on his throne, wearing a gray Confederate uniform jacket despite the war's end. His white beard was neatly trimmed, and he held a glass of amber liquid. "So," Nash said, not bothering to stand, "a black soldier comes to lecture me about proclamations." He sipped his drink. "Tell me, boy, do you believe everything you hear up north?" Josiah stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Nash. "The war is over, Colonel. The Confederacy surrendered. Those people are free by law." Nash laughed. "Law? Whose law? Not mine." He gestured to the fields. "This is Nash Plantation. My grandfather built it. My father expanded it. And I'll be damned if some paper signed in Washington changes what's mine." He leaned forward. "This far south, boy, nothing has changed." "I've come for my sister Ruth," Josiah said evenly, "and for all the others you're holding illegally." Nash studied him. "Ruth? Ah, the tall one. Good worker, that one. Keeps the others in line." He smiled coldly. "She's not for sale, at any price." "I'm not here to buy her," Josiah said. "I'm here because she's free. They all are." Nash's smile vanished. He stood suddenly, his chair rocking behind him. "Free? Let me show you what freedom means here." He barked orders to his men. Minutes later, Josiah stood in the plantation yard, surrounded by the white men. Nash had ordered all the field workers brought in. They stood in a ragged line, faces down, Ruth among them. "Samuel, step forward," Nash commanded. A muscular man in his 40s moved from the line, his eyes darting nervously between Nash and Josiah. "This man tried to leave last week," Nash said. "Claimed he was emancipated." He spat the word. "I'm going to show you what happens to my property when it tries to walk away." "Don't do this," Josiah said quietly. Nash ignored him. He nodded to his men. Two grabbed Samuel and tied him to a post in the yard. The overseer uncoiled his whip. "Make our visitor watch," Nash ordered. Rough hands seized Josiah's arms. He struggled until a rifle barrel pressed against his temple. "Ruth, too," Nash added. "Bring her up front." They pushed Ruth forward until she stood beside Josiah. She didn't look at him, but he felt her trembling. "Watch carefully," Nash told them both. "This is what freedom brings." The whip cracked. Samuel's back arched as it bit into his flesh. Again and again the lash fell, tearing skin, drawing blood. Samuel's screams filled the yard. The whipping continued long past what any man could bear. By the end, Samuel hung limp from the post, blood pooling beneath him. When they cut him down, he didn't move. "He's dead," one of the men said, almost surprised. Nash turned to Josiah. "That's what your proclamation is worth here. Now get off my land before you join him." They released Josiah's arms. He stood still, looking at Samuel's body, then at Ruth. Her eyes met his, filled with tears and fear. "I'll be back," Josiah whispered to her. "Tonight. Be ready." Ruth gave the slightest nod before lowering her eyes again. "What did you say to her?" Nash demanded. "I said goodbye," Josiah answered, his voice flat. "For now." 2 days later, Josiah knelt beside a freshly dug grave in the soft earth of the Yazoo swamps. Spanish moss hung like gray curtains from cypress trees, and the air was thick with humidity. The small clearing held a dozen makeshift shelters, branches and blankets forming rough homes for the people he'd led from Nash Plantation. Samuel's body lay wrapped in a cotton sheet at the bottom of the shallow hole. Josiah had carried him away that night, refusing to leave the man to be buried in unmarked ground. "Dust to dust," Josiah murmured, dropping a handful of dirt onto the sheet. "Rest now, brother." Behind him, 27 men, women, and children stood with bowed heads. Some cried quietly. Others stared with empty eyes, still not believing they were free. Ruth stepped forward and placed a crude wooden cross at the head of the grave. She wore a clean dress now, one Josiah had taken from a trunk at Nash's house before burning it to the ground. "He wanted to plant his own crops," she whispered. "That's all. Just to grow something for himself." Josiah stood, his hands caked with dirt. "There are others," he said, his voice carrying to the small crowd. "Other plantations where our people are still held. Nash wasn't the only one pretending the war changed nothing." An old man spoke up. "Best we keep moving north, son. The Union Army's up there. Safety's up there." "And leave the others in chains?" Josiah asked. "The Lord will free them in His time," the old man answered. Josiah's jaw tightened. "The Lord sent bullets and cannons to end slavery. Seems to me He works through men willing to act." After the others drifted back to the camp, Ruth stayed with Josiah by the grave. They hadn't had much time to talk since the escape. Too busy moving through swamps and woods, avoiding patrols, finding food. "I thought you were dead," Ruth said softly. "All these years." "I made it to Ohio," Josiah told her. "Found work on the docks. Then, when the war came, I joined up." He touched the worn blue coat he still wore. "Thought I could fight my way back to you." Ruth touched his face, tracing a scar that hadn't been there when they'd been separated. "And now? The war's done. We can go north together." Josiah looked past her, toward the horizon. "There's work still to do here." "Vengeance, you mean?" Ruth said, her voice hardening. "I saw Nash hanging from that tree." "I saw what you did." "Justice," Josiah corrected. "Not vengeance." Ruth shook her head. "Vengeance just brings more chains, Josiah. Different ones, maybe. Chains around your soul instead of your ankles. But chains all the same." Josiah looked at her steadily. "Then I'll break them too." A week later, Josiah walked alone through the streets of Jackson. The Mississippi capital still showed the scars of war. Burned buildings, broken windows, and Union soldiers patrolling the corners. White residents glared as he passed. Black freedmen nodded subtly. He found Ezekiel Boone exactly where he'd hoped. In a smoky back room of Miller's Tavern, a place that served both black and white customers as long as they used separate doors. Zeke sat with his back to the wall, nursing a glass of whiskey, a worn Union cap pulled low over his eyes. "Thought you'd be long gone to Chicago by now," Josiah said, sliding into the chair across from him. Zeke's narrow face broke into a grin. "Josiah Holt. Heard you died at Vicksburg." "Not yet." Josiah leaned forward. "Need to talk to you about something. Private." Zeke studied him, then nodded toward the door. "Caleb's patching up folks at the freedmen's camp on the edge of town. We can talk there." They walked in silence through streets filled with tension. Union victory hadn't brought peace, only a different kind of war, one fought with glares and threats, burned homes and midnight raids. The freedmen's camp spread across what had once been a fairground. Hundreds of ragged tents housed families who had nowhere else to go. Children ran between them, their laughter a strange sound amid so much suffering. They found Caleb Stokes in a large tent marked with a crude red cross. The former preacher bent over a young woman's arm, stitching a deep cut with steady hands. His once fine clothes were stained with blood and dirt. "Almost done, sister," Caleb said gently. "Lord's giving you strength." When he finished, he looked up and spotted Josiah and Zeke. His tired face brightened. "Well now," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth, "if it isn't two of the finest scouts the Union ever had." They embraced like brothers. In the quiet corner of the medical tent, Josiah told them about Nash Plantation, about Samuel, about the others still enslaved across the Delta. "The Army knows," Caleb said, shaking his head, "but they say they don't have enough men to check every plantation. They're focused on the big towns, the rail lines. So we do it ourselves," Josiah said simply. Zeke laughed without humor. "Just the three of us. Against how many armed men?" Josiah reached into his coat and pulled out a folded map. He spread it across a small table, revealing detailed markings of plantations, roads, and waterways across Mississippi and Louisiana. "I took this from a Confederate officer," he explained. "It shows every major plantation in the region, and I've marked the ones where people are still being held." Caleb and Zeke stared at the map. "How many?" Caleb asked quietly. 23 that I know of," Josiah answered. "Over 1,000 of our people." Zeke ran a finger along the map's lines. "This is suicide, brother." "No," Josiah shook his head. "It's justice. We hit at night. Free the people. Move them north through the swamps. The plantation owners won't know what happened until it's done." "And the owners?" Caleb asked, his eyes troubled. Josiah's face hardened. They had their chance to obey the law. By sunset 3 months later, Josiah stood on the riverbank, watching 50 men, women, and children board a steamboat bound for Cairo, Illinois. The captain, a Union sympathizer, had been paid well to ask no questions. Beside Josiah stood Zeke, his rifle slung over his shoulder, and Caleb, carrying his medical bag. The three had become the core of what the freed people called the Dawning Men, because they always struck just before dawn. "That's 4 plantations in 3 weeks," Zeke said quietly. "Word's spreading. Some owners are running before we even get there." Caleb nodded. "It's the signs that scare them most." He held up one of the wooden markers they'd begun leaving at each plantation they raided. A rough board with the words burned into it. "Justice rides at dawn." The last of the freed people climbed aboard the steamboat. A woman turned and waved to Josiah before disappearing below deck. He raised his hand in response. 500, he said softly. 500 will walk free before I'm done." "You said 1,000 before," Zeke reminded him. "There are more than I thought," Josiah replied, "but we'll find them all." Lightning flashed suddenly, turning the dusky world bright white for a heartbeat. In that flash, Josiah caught sight of a figure standing at the tree line, someone watching them, a stranger in a long coat. The light faded as quickly as it had come, and the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" Josiah asked sharply. Zeke's hand moved to his rifle. "See what?" Josiah stared at the empty trees. "Someone was watching us. Federal agent, maybe," Caleb suggested. "Or bounty hunter. Or someone else who needs our help," Josiah said, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the figure had stood. The steamboat's whistle blew, and the great paddle wheel began to turn, churning the muddy water. Another 50 souls heading north to freedom. But for everyone they saved, Josiah knew there were dozens more waiting, hidden behind plantation walls and false claims of debt labor. Thunder rolled across the sky. Rain was coming. "Let's move," Josiah said. "We need to be in Natchez by morning." 3 weeks later, the freedmen's camp outside Vicksburg bustled with activity. Tents stretched across what had once been cotton fields, now repurposed as a temporary haven for those seeking new lives. Children played between rows of canvas shelters while women hung laundry on makeshift lines. Men gathered in small groups, discussing work opportunities or sharing stories of escape. Josiah sat on an overturned barrel, cleaning his pistol while keeping watch over the camp's southern edge. The Dawning Men had escorted 30 more freed people here just yesterday. Former slaves from the Wilkinson plantation who'd been held as debt laborers until Josiah and his men arrived. "Mr. Holt?" A woman's voice made him look up. She stood before him, notebook in hand, tall, straight-backed, dressed in a simple brown traveling dress that couldn't hide its quality. Her hair was pulled back severely, but wisps had escaped in the humidity. She had the confident posture of someone used to classrooms and order. "Who's asking?" Josiah replied, not stopping his work on the pistol. "Clara Green," she said, extending her hand as if they were meeting at a Boston social. When he didn't take it, she withdrew it smoothly. "I'm a teacher. I write for the Northern Liberator." "That abolitionist paper?" Josiah finished reassembling his weapon. Yes, I'm documenting stories of emancipation across the South. She studied him carefully. Stories like yours, Mr. Holt. Josiah holstered his pistol. Don't know what stories you've heard, ma'am, but I'm just helping folks get where they need to go. Clara smiled slightly. Is that what you call it? Because I've heard other names. The Dawn Rider? The Master Hunter? Zeke approached from behind her, rifle slung over his shoulder. Who's your friend, Josiah? She's not my friend, Josiah said flatly. She's a newspaper woman. Clara turned to Zeke, undeterred. Ezekiel Boone, isn't it? Former Union sharpshooter, 17th Illinois Infantry. I've heard about you, too. Zeke raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you've been asking a lot of questions, ma'am. That's my job, she replied, and it's important work. What's happening here? What you men are doing? People need to know about it. So they can what? Josiah asked. Send us medals? Or soldiers to stop us? Clara's expression grew serious. So they can understand what true liberation looks like. Not handed down from Washington, but taken by the very people who were denied it. Josiah and Zeke exchanged glances. There was something in her words that rang true, despite their wariness. 1 hour, Josiah finally said. You can talk to whoever agrees to speak with you. Then you move on. Clara nodded. Thank you. By evening, Clara had filled 3 notebooks. She'd interviewed not just Josiah and his men, but dozens of the freed people they'd rescued. She sat now by the main campfire, still writing as darkness fell. Across the flames, Josiah watched her with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant respect. Caleb sat down beside him, passing him a tin cup of coffee. That woman's been writing since sunup, Caleb observed. Too many words, Josiah muttered. Maybe, Caleb said, but she's right about one thing. What we're doing here, it's history being made. Someone ought to write it down right. Elias Reed joined them, his light skin glowing in the firelight. The mixed-race preacher had joined the Dawning Men a month ago, bringing with him a silver tongue that could calm frightened escapees and talk their way past Union checkpoints. The teacher from Boston, Elias said, nodding toward Clara. She asks too many questions. Thought you liked talking, preacher, Zeke remarked, arriving with his own cup. Elias's smile didn't reach his eyes. About the Lord's work, yes. About men's business, that's different. Clara approached their circle, notebook still in hand. May I join you? Josiah gestured to an empty spot. She sat, arranging her skirts carefully. I want to thank you all, she said. The stories I've gathered today, they'll change minds in the North. That what you think we need? Josiah asked. Changed minds. We need changed laws, Elias added, and men to enforce them. Clara looked directly at Josiah. What I think you need is your story told truthfully, not as murderers or vigilantes, but as men fighting for freedom in the only way left to you. And what's your interest in this, Mrs. Green? Josiah asked. What brings a Boston widow all the way down here? Clara's expression flickered with surprise that he knew her status. My husband died at Antietam, she said quietly. He believed in the cause of freedom. I'm here to make sure his sacrifice, and the sacrifices of everyone in this fight, aren't forgotten or twisted by history. Fine words, Elias said, but words don't stop bullets. A young boy ran up to their circle, interrupting them. Mr. Josiah! Rider coming fast! Josiah stood immediately, hand on his pistol. Minutes later, a man on horseback galloped into camp. It was Marcus, one of their scouts. Bounty hunters! Marcus gasped, sliding from his horse. 5 miles south. Looking for you, Josiah. Offering $50 gold for the Dawn Rider. Murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. Who's paying? Zeke asked sharply. That's the thing, Marcus replied. It ain't rebels. The bounty's been posted by Southern Loyalist Coalition, those rich planters working with the Northern Occupation Government. Josiah's face darkened. So they've finally decided which side they're on. Clara had stopped writing, watching the exchange with wide eyes. "We should move tonight," Caleb suggested. "Head west toward the river." Josiah nodded. "Start packing up. Anyone who wants to come with us can. The rest should head for Vicksburg proper. It's safer there." As the camp burst into activity, Clara approached Josiah again. "I'm coming with you. This isn't a story anymore, Mrs. Green. It's dangerous. All the more reason it needs to be documented," she insisted. "Besides, I've come too far to turn back now." Across the camp, unseen by the others, Elias Reed slipped behind a tent. From his pocket, he drew a folded letter. In the fading light, he scribbled a few more lines, then sealed it. He handed it to a young boy with a whispered instruction and a coin pressed into his palm. The camp had mostly settled for the night, though preparations for tomorrow's departure continued around smaller fires. Josiah sat with Zeke, Clara, and Caleb, planning their route west. "If we cross here," Josiah pointed to a spot on his map, "we can avoid the main roads." Clara watched him intently, occasionally making notes. "How many more plantations are on your list?" she asked. "Too many," Josiah answered. "But we'll get to them all, one by—" Zeke suddenly held up his hand. Movement. In the brush. The conversation stopped. Josiah slowly reached for his pistol. The gunshot cracked through the night without warning. Josiah felt the hot sting as the bullet grazed his upper arm. He dropped to the ground, rolling toward cover as Zeke returned fire into the darkness. Shouts erupted across the camp. Men with rifles formed a perimeter, while women hurried children into tents. "Did you see him?" Josiah asked, pressing his hand against the bleeding wound. Zeke shook his head. "Just a shadow. He's gone now." Caleb hurried over with his medical bag, but Clara was already tearing a strip from her petticoat. "Let me," she said, taking Josiah's arm. "I nursed during the war." While she worked, Zeke and others searched the area where the shot had come from. They returned minutes later, Zeke holding something in his palm. "Found this," he said, dropping it into Josiah's hand. A brass shell casing with distinct markings. Josiah examined it in the firelight. "Union issue. Standard Army ammunition." Clara finished bandaging his arm. "You think it was the bounty hunters?" "No," Josiah said, his eyes moving across the faces gathered around the fire, lingering briefly on Elias, who had joined them during the commotion. "That wasn't a rebel's shot. That was one of ours." The crackling fire cast wavering shadows across the tense circle of faces. No one spoke. In the silence, the implication hung heavy. Someone they trusted had betrayed them. The fog hung thick over the swamp the next morning, turning trees into ghostly shadows. Josiah led the way, a cloth map in one hand and his rifle in the other. Behind him trailed 30 people, his dawning men fighters and the families they'd rescued. The damp air muffled their footsteps as they waded through shallow water and mud. Clara Green walked near the front, notebook open despite the moisture that curled its pages. Every few minutes, she stopped to ask a name, writing each one with careful strokes. "Ma'am, we need to keep moving," Zeke whispered when she paused again to speak with an elderly woman. "Her name is Esther Jenkins," Clara replied firmly. "She's 73 years old and hasn't been counted as a person on any paper except slave schedules. She deserves to have her name written down." Josiah glanced back, his face unreadable beneath the wide brim of his hat. "Let her write, Zeke. The dead have no names. The living should." Ruth walked beside a group of children, her gentle voice keeping them calm and quiet. The wound on her brother's arm worried her. The bandage Clara had applied last night already showed spots of fresh blood. At the rear of the group, Elias Reed kept pace with measured steps. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the northern trail they'd passed an hour ago. His fingers absently touched the inside pocket of his coat. "Preacher," Caleb called softly, "you're falling behind." Elias quickened his steps. "Just praying for safe passage," he said, forcing a smile. "Pray with your feet moving," Caleb replied. By midday, the fog had burned away, replaced by sticky heat. The group approached a clearing where an abandoned church stood, its white paint peeling, one wall charred black from fire. "This is it," Josiah told the gathered men. "The slave camp is half a mile southwest, near the old Port Gibson Road. According to Marcus, they're holding at least 40 people there." He spread the cloth map on a fallen log. "Zeke, you and Caleb circle around from the east. I'll take 4 men straight in. Ruth, you stay here with Clara and the others. If you hear sustained gunfire, head north immediately." Ruth nodded, though her eyes showed worry. "We'll be back before sundown," Josiah assured her. Clara stepped forward. "I should come with you. To document—" "Not this time," Josiah cut her off. "This camp has armed guards. We might have to fight our way in." Elias cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should lead a prayer before we—" A gunshot cracked through the air, splintering wood on the church door. "Ambush!" Zeke shouted, diving for cover. More shots followed, not random fire, but coordinated volleys. Through the trees, Josiah caught glimpses of blue uniforms, not the gray of Confederates. "Union soldiers!" he yelled. "Take cover!" Panic erupted. Women grabbed children and ran toward the swamp. The dawning men returned fire, but they were outnumbered and caught in the open. Bullets tore through the clearing. Marcus fell first, shot through the chest. Then Samuel. Then 3 more men Josiah had recruited just weeks ago. Bullets thudded into the old church walls as people scrambled for safety. "The children!" Ruth cried, rushing toward where 5 young ones huddled behind a water trough. As she reached them, a bullet struck her in the back. She stumbled forward, still trying to shield the children with her body. "Ruth!" Josiah abandoned his position and ran to her, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. He reached her just as she collapsed. Her eyes found his, already growing distant. "Get them north, Josiah," she whispered. "Promise me." "I promise," he choked out. But she was already gone. Clara appeared at his side. "We have to move now," she urged, helping him lift Ruth's body. Together they retreated toward the swamp, bullets still flying around them. The ambush had been perfectly planned. Half of the dawning men lay dead in the clearing. Others were being bound by Union soldiers who shouted orders and threats. Josiah, carrying Ruth, led the survivors deeper into the swamp where the soldiers wouldn't follow. Only 12 of them had escaped: Clara, Caleb, 3 other fighters, and 7 of the freed people, including the children Ruth had died protecting. Elias was not among them. Hours later, in a small clearing surrounded by cypress trees, they buried Ruth. Josiah dug the grave himself, refusing help, his face set like stone. As the last shovelful of earth covered his sister, rain began to fall. Gentle at first, then heavier. "I need to find dry wood," Caleb said quietly. "I'll check Elias's pack. He always carried kindling." At the mention of Elias, Josiah's head snapped up. "His pack? We grabbed it during the escape," Caleb explained, lifting a canvas satchel from their meager pile of belongings. Josiah took it, emptying the contents onto the wet ground. Bible, spare shirt, dried meat, and a folded letter sealed with wax. He broke the seal and read it, his expression darkening with each line. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Proof," Josiah said, his voice deadly quiet. He handed her the letter. Clara read aloud. "To Federal Officer of Reconstruction. The dawning men will approach Port Gibson via the East Swamp Path on Thursday. 30 armed men plus women and children. Their leader, Josiah Holt, should be taken alive if possible for public trial. In exchange for this information, I request full clemency and passage north as promised. Elias Reed, Minister of the Word." Silence fell, broken only by the steady rain. "He sold us out," Caleb whispered. "But Elias isn't here," Clara said. "He must have been captured or—" "He wasn't captured," Josiah cut her off. "He's waiting to be collected. And I know exactly where. At dusk, They found Elias hiding in the burned church, just as Josiah had predicted. He was huddled in the former vestry, soaked from the rain, jumping at every sound. When Josiah's men dragged him out, he didn't resist. "I did what I had to do," Elias babbled. "This path of violence, it was never going to work. They promised me no one would be hurt if I helped them." Josiah stood silently in the rain, watching him with dead eyes. "They lied to me," Elias continued desperately. "I didn't know they would shoot. I just wanted the fighting to stop." "On your knees," Josiah ordered. The surviving Dawning men formed a circle. Clara stood apart, her notebook closed, her face pale. "Tell them," Josiah commanded. "Tell them what you did." Elias swallowed hard. Rain streamed down his face like tears. I wrote to the Union commander. I told him where we would be." "Why?" "Because I was afraid," Elias cried. "Afraid we'd all die like this, hunted like animals, afraid of becoming the very monsters we fought against." "My sister is dead because of you," Josiah said, his voice flat. "Half our people captured or killed." "I'm sorry," Elias whispered. "God forgive me. I'm sorry." Josiah drew his pistol. "You want forgiveness?" Clara stepped forward. "Josiah, don't—" The gunshot cracked through the rain-soaked air, echoing across the swamp. Elias collapsed forward, a dark hole in his forehead. Clara turned away, hand over her mouth. The remaining men stood in solemn silence. Josiah holstered his pistol. Rain washed the blood into the churned mud around their feet. "We don't forgive chains," he said coldly, looking down at Elias's body. "Not the ones they put on our wrists, and not the ones they put on our souls." The rain fell harder, drumming on the burned roof of the old church, washing away footprints, but not memories, not betrayal, not revenge. Night fell like a heavy blanket over the swamp. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from cypress branches, each drop echoing in the darkness. The small fire barely pushed back the shadows where the remaining Dawning men huddled in silence. Elias's body lay wrapped in canvas at the edge of camp. No one had suggested burying him. "We can't stay together," Josiah announced, his voice flat. "They'll be looking for a large group. We need to split up." The men nodded, their faces grim in the firelight. "Caleb, take the children and 3 others. Head northeast toward Vicksburg. The Union outpost there has a sympathetic captain." Caleb looked at the 5 children sleeping nearby. "What about you?" "I'm going after our people," Josiah said. "The ones they captured." Clara, who had been silent since the execution, finally spoke. "That's suicide." "It's necessary," Josiah countered. The others moved away, sensing the coming argument. When they were alone by the fire, Clara leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Josiah, listen to me. Your sister is dead. Half your men are gone. The smart choice, the only choice, is to go north, now, and leave our people in chains? Again?" Josiah shook his head. "No. The Union will transport them to work camps, not kill them," Clara argued. "Work camps?" Josiah's laugh was bitter. "A new name for the same old chains?" Clara ran her fingers through her hair, frustrated. "What happened to Elias was wrong, but he got what traitors deserve. You executed him without trial, just like Colonel Nash would have done." The words hung between them. Josiah's face hardened. "Don't you ever compare me to that monster." Clara didn't back down. "Then don't act like him. Vengeance is becoming your god, Josiah. It's eating you alive." "Vengeance?" Josiah's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you think this is? Simple revenge? What else would you call it?" "Justice," he said. "The only kind we'll ever get." Clara shook her head sadly. "There's no justice in becoming what you hate." She rose, dusting off her skirt. "I'm going north with Caleb and the children. Come with us, please." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" Josiah stared into the fire. "Ruth died protecting those children. Her last words were, 'Get them north. I made a promise.' Caleb can fulfill that promise, Clara said gently. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. I'm not sacrificing anything, Josiah replied, though his eyes told a different story. I'm finishing what I started. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Then I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous. I didn't come south to document safe stories, she said firmly. I came to tell the truth, all of it. Josiah didn't argue further. Perhaps he knew it would be useless, or perhaps, though he wouldn't admit it, he didn't want to face what came next, alone. They traveled west for 3 days, moving mostly at night. Their group had dwindled to just 5, Josiah, Clara, Zeke, and 2 younger men named Moses and Isaiah. The rest had gone north with Caleb and the children. Rumors reached them through scattered freedmen hiding in the bayous. Captured black men and women were being sent to Devil's Crossing, a fortified plantation on the Louisiana border where Confederate holdouts and corrupt Union officers ran a brutal labor operation. They call it debt peonage, explained an old man they met fishing in a creek. Say, colored folks owe money for their freedom. Make 'em work it off. But the debt never gets smaller. On the 3rd night, camped in a hollow between cypress roots, Josiah woke gasping from a dream. Samuel stood before him, the whip marks still fresh on his back. Behind him stood Ruth, blood seeping through her dress. You're becoming him, Samuel said, his eyes sad. I'm nothing like Nash, Josiah answered in the dream. Look at your hand, Ruth whispered. Josiah looked down to find his hands covered in blood that wouldn't wash away. He woke to find Clara watching him from across the dying fire. Bad dreams? She asked quietly. Just memories, he lied, wiping sweat from his face. The next day, they reached the Atchafalaya River. Devil's Crossing lay less than 5 miles west. As dusk fell, they made camp in a dense thicket, keeping the fire small. Tomorrow we scout, Josiah told the others. No action until we know their strength. Clara wrote in her journal by firelight, documenting everything. Zeke kept watch at the edge of camp, his rifle across his knees. Someone's coming, he hissed suddenly. Put out the fire. Moses kicked dirt over the flames, but it was too late. Through the trees came the sound of horses and men talking. Union patrol, Josiah whispered. 5, maybe 6. Spread out. They melted into the darkness just as horsemen entered the clearing. 6 soldiers, as Josiah had guessed, led by a lieutenant with a trimmed beard. Someone was here, the lieutenant said, dismounting to touch the scattered embers. Recently. Probably just runaways, another soldier suggested. Or our bounty target, the lieutenant replied. Search the area. As the soldiers spread out, Josiah signaled to Zeke and Moses. In perfect silence, they circled behind the patrol. What happened next was over in seconds. 3 soldiers dropped without a sound, knives across their throats. The others reached for weapons but found guns already pointed at their heads. Drop them, Josiah ordered. The lieutenant and his 2 remaining men surrendered. Josiah had Moses and Isaiah tie them to trees, while Zeke kept watch. You're him, aren't you? The lieutenant asked, his voice steady despite his fear. The Dawn Rider. Where are they taking the captured freedmen? Josiah demanded, ignoring the question. I don't know what you're talking about. Josiah pressed his knife against the man's throat. Devil's Crossing. What's happening there? The lieutenant swallowed. Labor contracts. Perfectly legal. Slavery by another name. Josiah growled. Who put the bounty on my head? Southern planters? A bitter laugh escaped the lieutenant. Southern planters? No, that order came straight from Washington. Clara stepped forward. Washington? The Union government wants him dead? The Bureau of Military Reconstruction considers him a dangerous insurgent, the lieutenant explained, seeming almost relieved to talk. They say he's destabilizing the entire recovery effort. Recovery for who? Josiah asked coldly. Look, I'm just following orders, the lieutenant said. The war's over. The government needs stability to rebuild. Your raids are causing chaos. Freeing slaves causes chaos? They're not slaves anymore. That's the point. Josiah's laugh was hollow. Tell that to the people at Devil's Crossing. He stepped back, considering the lieutenant. How many men guard the crossing? I don't know. You're lying. The lieutenant met his eyes. Kill me if you want. I won't help you attack federal soldiers. Josiah nodded slowly. Zeke, gag them. We'll be gone by dawn. Later that night, Clara sat beside the rekindled fire, writing rapidly in her journal. Josiah sat across from her, methodically sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The steady scrape of steel filled the silence. Even the government fears you, she whispered, looking up from her pages. Good, he replied without pausing his work. You don't understand, Clara said. If Washington has declared you an enemy, there's no safe place left. Not in the South, not in the North. Josiah tested the knife's edge against his thumb. I never expected to live through this. Then what are you fighting for? He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. For them to remember, for them to know what freedom really cost. Clara's pen hovered over the page. And after? After doesn't matter. Josiah stood, sheathing his knife. He turned westward, where distant torches flickered at Devil's Crossing, barely visible through the trees. Then they'll fear the day I stop, he said quietly. Clara watched him, understanding finally the truth of the man she'd chosen to follow. Not a hero from a northern newspaper's dreams, but something harder, darker, born from suffering she could document, but never truly know. 3 nights later, the moon hung like a bloated corpse above the fields surrounding Devil's Crossing. Josiah pressed his body flat against the damp earth, the smell of sweet cane and rot filling his nostrils. To his left, Clara crouched behind a stump, her journal replaced with a loaded pistol. Zeke lay belly down in the mud 20 yards away, rifle ready, his eye already fixed to the scope. Devil's Crossing was worse than the rumors. What had once been a sugar plantation now resembled a prison camp. Iron cages lined the yard where men, women, and children huddled against the night chill. Guards with Union uniforms patrolled between them, bayonets fixed. The air stank of molasses, human waste, and something darker, despair. I count 15 guards, Zeke whispered when Josiah crawled to his position, most at the north gate, 4 walking the fence line. Josiah nodded. And inside? More. Can't tell how many. Zeke adjusted his scope. That big house at the center, that's where he'll be. Captain Briggs. The name hung in the air like poison. Captain Harlan Briggs, former Union officer turned overseer of this hellhole. According to their scouts, he ran Devil's Crossing with cruel efficiency, working freedmen to death on labor contracts that never ended. Everyone knows what to do? Josiah asked. The 5 remaining dawning men nodded. Clara's face was set with determination. Remember, Josiah said quietly, get the people out first, then we burn it all. Zeke placed a hand on Josiah's shoulder. Just like old times, brother. Just like old times, Josiah echoed, though his heart felt heavy with premonition. When you see my signal, start shooting. Josiah slipped forward through the cane, keeping low. The moonlight caught on the metal cages, turning them silver. Inside, dark figures stirred, sensing something in the night air. Hope, perhaps. Or just another false promise. When he reached the edge of the fields, Josiah removed a small mirror from his pocket. He angled it to catch the moonlight, sending 3 quick flashes toward Zeke's position. The rifle's report cracked through the night. A guard on the watchtower jerked backward, then fell. Before the body hit the ground, Zeke had fired twice more. 2 more guards dropped. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted, running for cover. Lanterns flared to life across the compound. In that moment of confusion, Josiah sprinted forward, 2 of his men close behind. They reached the first cage, where a dozen black men huddled in fear. "We're here to free you," Josiah said, working at the lock with tools from his belt. "Stay low and run for the cane fields. Our people will guide you north." The lock broke. The men poured out, disbelieving their sudden freedom. Josiah moved to the next cage, then the next. All around him, the night erupted in gunfire and shouts. Clara led a group of women and children toward the swamp path, whispering urgent instructions. "Keep together. Don't stop for anything. There are boats waiting at the river." From the main house, a commanding voice bellowed orders. A tall figure emerged onto the porch, pistol in hand. Captain Harlan Briggs surveyed the chaos with cold fury, his scarred face illuminated by burning outbuildings. "Kill them all!" he shouted. "No one leaves!" More guards appeared, firing indiscriminately into the fleeing crowds. Zeke's rifle answered, methodically dropping one after another. But they kept coming. Josiah had reached the far side of the compound, freeing the last cages when he spotted Clara. She was helping an elderly woman who had fallen. Behind her, a guard raised his rifle. "Clara!" Josiah shouted, running toward her. Too late. He fired his pistol, dropping the guard, but two more appeared. Pain tore through Josiah's shoulder. A bullet, white-hot and vicious. He stumbled, but kept moving. When he reached Clara, she was struggling against a guard twice her size. Josiah tackled the man, the pain in his shoulder exploding into blinding agony. They rolled in the dirt, trading blows. The guard's hands closed around Josiah's throat. A gunshot cracked. The pressure released. Clara stood over them, her pistol still smoking. "Run!" Josiah gasped, struggling to his feet. Blood soaked his shirt. "Get the people to the boats." "Not without you," she insisted. "I have one more thing to do." He pulled a small package from his coat. Gunpowder wrapped in oilcloth. "The storehouse. It's full of ammunition." Understanding dawned on her face. "You'll never make it. You're bleeding too much." "Then I'll bleed." He pressed his forehead against hers briefly. "Get them out, Clara. Tell our story." Before she could argue, more guards swarmed toward them. Zeke's rifle spoke again and again from the darkness, buying precious seconds. Josiah pushed Clara toward the fleeing crowd. "Go!" he commanded. She hesitated, then ran. Josiah limped toward the storehouse, clutching his wounded shoulder. The world swam before his eyes. Each step was agony. He didn't see Captain Briggs until the man stepped directly into his path, pistol raised. "The famous Dawn Rider," Briggs said, his voice oddly calm amid the chaos. "Not so legendary up close." Josiah lunged, knocking the gun aside. They crashed through the storehouse door together, grappling in the darkness. Briggs was stronger, uninjured. His fist connected with Josiah's wounded shoulder, sending lightning through his body. "You think you're fighting for freedom?" Briggs hissed, pinning Josiah down. "You're just creating anarchy. These people need order, structure." "They need justice!" Josiah gasped. His hand found the bundle of gunpowder. With his last strength, he struck a match against the floor and touched it to the fuse. Briggs saw the flame, understood too late. He scrambled backward. "Guards! Seize the woman! The teacher!" Josiah heard Clara's scream as Briggs fled. He tried to rise, to follow, but his body betrayed him. The fuse sputtered toward the powder. Through the doorway, he saw Zeke break cover, running toward Clara as Briggs's men dragged her toward the main house. Zeke fired, dropping 2 guards. The third shot him in the chest. "No!" Josiah cried. The explosion took everything else. Dawn broke in shades of gray and pink over the river. Josiah lay half-submerged on the muddy bank, consciousness coming and going like the gentle waves against his body. The pain in his shoulder had dulled to a distant throb. Blood no longer flowed, whether because the wound had clotted or because he had none left to give, he couldn't tell. Voices drifted from the clearing above. The freed people had gathered there, singing hymns in low, mournful tones. A burial. Zeke's burial. With tremendous effort, Josiah pulled himself up the bank. His legs refused to work properly, so he crawled, leaving a trail of mud and blood behind him. The singing grew louder. Nearly 200 freedmen stood in a circle around a fresh mound of earth. An old man led them in "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." His voice cracked with age, but full of feeling. Zeke's rifle stood upright in the soil, marking his final resting place. Josiah reached the edge of the circle. A woman noticed him and gasped. Strong hands lifted him, carried him to Zeke's grave. They offered him water, which he drank greedily. "Clara," he managed to say. "Where is she?" The old song leader shook his head sadly. "They took her, son. That devil captain and what's left of his men. Headed north with her, and a few others, before the big explosion." Josiah closed his eyes, grief and failure washing over him. "You saved us," a young woman said, kneeling beside him. "All of us." "Not all," Josiah whispered. "Not Clara. Not Zeke." The singing resumed around him. 100 voices lifted in both mourning and celebration. Freedom had come at terrible cost. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the cypress trees, Josiah placed his hand on the fresh-turned earth of Zeke's grave. "We freed them all," he whispered, "and lost ourselves." Josiah opened his eyes to darkness. For a moment, panic seized him. Was he dead? Then came the pain, dull and throbbing in his shoulder. No, not dead. Death wouldn't hurt this much. Slowly, the darkness took shape. A small shack, moonlight filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. The smell of herbs and smoke hung in the air. "You back with us now?" a voice asked. Josiah turned his head. An elderly black woman sat on a stool beside his pallet. Her face was deeply lined, her hair white as cotton, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a croak. "My place," she said simply. "Name's Mabel Carter. You've been sleeping for near 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Josiah tried to sit up but fell back, his strength gone. "Easy now," Mabel said, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "That bullet tore you up something fierce. Fever almost took you twice." Memories flooded back. Devil's Crossing, the explosion, Zeke's death, Clara's capture. Josiah closed his eyes against the pain of remembering. "They say you're dead," Mabel continued, stirring something in a small pot. "The Dawn Rider, killed at Devil's Crossing. White folks celebrating. Colored folks lighting candles. Let them think it," Josiah whispered. "Better that way." Mabel nodded, as if she'd expected this answer. "Some of your men came through here, heading north. Said there wasn't no point fighting anymore. Said the war never ended, just changed hands." She helped him sit up enough to sip a bitter tea. It tasted of willow bark and something else, something that made his head clearer. "The woman," Josiah said after drinking. "Clara. Did they say anything about her?" Mabel's face softened with pity. "She alive. That's what I hear. They took her to Camp McPherson, outside Baton Rouge. Union work camp, they call it." "Work camp? Just another word for plantation," Mabel said flatly. "Union soldiers instead of overseers, contracts instead of whips, but the cotton still needs picking." Josiah stared at the ceiling, digesting this. Clara had warned him. The system never died. It just changed its face. "How far to Baton Rouge?" Mabel shook her head. "You thinking of going after her? In your condition?" "How far?" he repeated. 4 days on foot, if you was healthy. Which you ain't." Josiah closed his eyes. "I'll heal." 3 days later, Josiah could walk. 5 days, and he could run. By the end of the week, he was strong enough to leave. Mabel packed him food and clean bandages. "You going to get yourself killed?" she said matter-of-factly. "Probably," Josiah admitted. "But I owe her." Mabel studied him. "This about debt? Or something else?" Josiah didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. He traveled by night, following the river south. His shoulder ached with every step, but he pushed through the pain. During the day, he slept in abandoned barns or dense thickets, always alert for patrols. Once he stole a horse from a farmhouse, riding it until it tired, then setting it free. Another time, he raided a doctor's office for laudanum and fresh bandages. The medicine dulled the pain enough to keep moving. Near a place called Bayou Sara, Josiah came across a group of freedmen working a cotton field. He watched from the tree line as a white man on horseback, wearing a Union uniform, shouted orders. The workers moved slowly, exhausted beyond caring. Josiah approached after dark, finding their shanties at the edge of the field. The men were suspicious at first, hands reaching for hidden knives. "I'm just passing through," Josiah said, showing his empty hands. "Looking for information about Camp McPherson." An older man spat in the dirt. "Why you want to know about that hellhole? They have someone I need to find." The freedmen exchanged looks. Finally, a younger man spoke up. "My cousin worked there, said they got hundreds of us on labor contracts. 5 years minimum, no pay till the end, and deductions for food and shelter that make sure you never see a penny." "How's that different from slavery?" Josiah asked. "It ain't," the old man said simply. "Just got union papers instead of slave papers." They shared their meager food with Josiah. In return, he told them about Devil's Crossing, careful not to reveal his identity. That night, Josiah dreamed of Ruth. She stood by a river, washing clothes. "You turning into him?" she said without looking up. "The master." Josiah woke in a cold sweat. The next dream was Elias, blood running from the hole in his head. "Was I wrong to be afraid?" he asked. "Or were you wrong to be so sure?" When morning came, Josiah moved on, the dreams clinging to him like Spanish moss. 2 more days of hard travel brought him within sight of Camp McPherson. He lay on a ridge overlooking the compound as twilight fell. Below, floodlights illuminated a sprawling camp, rows of tents, wooden barracks, and watchtowers. Men in Union blue patrolled the perimeter. In the fields beyond, black workers shuffled in chains, returning from a day's labor. Josiah spotted a larger building near the center, the commander's quarters, likely. Would Clara be there? Or in the women's barracks? He needed to get closer, to watch the routines, find the weak points. His hand went to the pistol tucked in his belt. 6 bullets. Not enough. He would need more weapons, maybe create a diversion. As night deepened, Josiah watched supply wagons enter through the main gate. Guards checked them casually, more concerned with what might leave than what came in. A plan began to form in his mind. Not a raid like before. He had no army now. This would require patience, cunning. He would need to become a ghost, slipping through their defenses. The last time he'd fought for vengeance, he'd lost his soul. This time, he was fighting for redemption. Below, a bell rang. The laborers were herded into barracks. Locks clanged shut. Guards lit cigarettes, relaxing as night fell. Josiah gripped his pistol, the metal cold against his palm. Clara's voice echoed in his memory. "If you burn every field, Josiah, what will you plant in its place?" He hadn't had an answer then. Maybe he did now. "If freedom's a lie," he whispered to the darkening sky, "then I'll rewrite it in fire." Night fell over Camp McPherson like a heavy blanket. Josiah crouched in the underbrush beyond the fence, watching the changing of the guard. 3 sentries at the main gate, another 4 patrolling the perimeter. Fewer than he expected. They weren't worried about threats from outside, only keeping prisoners in. A wagon approached, loaded with supplies. Josiah had been watching them come and go all day. This one carried food, hardtack, beans, salt pork. Not for the prisoners, he guessed, but for the guards. When the wagon stopped at the gate, Josiah made his move. He slipped through the shadows to the rear of the wagon, sliding underneath it. With practiced silence, he gripped the wooden frame and pulled himself up, wedging his body between sacks of flour. The guards barely glanced inside. "Same delivery as always, Jones?" "Yep," came the driver's bored reply. "Just sign here." The wagon creaked forward, passing through the gate. Josiah held his breath until they reached the supply shed. When the driver hopped down and went inside with the clerk, Josiah rolled silently to the ground and disappeared behind a water barrel. From there, he surveyed the camp. To his right stood the barracks, long wooden buildings with barred windows. To his left, the officers' quarters and administrative buildings. Straight ahead, enclosed by a separate fence, was what could only be described as a pen, where women were kept. A whistle blew. Men in tattered clothes shuffled from the barracks toward a cook fire, where watery soup was being ladled into tin cups. They moved with the slow, defeated gait Josiah recognized from plantations, the walk of people who had given up hope. He needed to blend in. Slipping behind the supply shed, he found a pile of discarded clothes, torn trousers, a filthy shirt. He changed quickly, rubbing dirt on his face and hands. Then he joined the line for food, head down, shoulders slumped. Nobody questioned him. The guards barely looked at the faces of the men they controlled. As the prisoners ate, Josiah listened to their whispers. Jackson got 50 lashes today. Couldn't meet his quota. They're sending another 20 north tomorrow. Railroad work. New woman came in last week. White lady. They keep her separate. Josiah's heart quickened. Clara. After the meal, the prisoners returned to the barracks. Josiah followed, finding a dark corner where he could observe without being noticed. Men collapsed onto thin pallets, too exhausted to talk much. Some nursed fresh wounds on their backs. Others stared vacantly at the ceiling. Around midnight, when even the guards grew lax, Josiah slipped out. The women's pen was guarded by a single sentry, who paced with bored regularity. Timing his movements to the guard's pattern, Josiah crept to the fence. "Clara," he whispered through the slats. No answer. "Clara Green." A shadow moved inside. A woman approached cautiously, then gasped. "Josiah, they said you were dead." Her face appeared between the boards, thinner than he remembered, a bruise yellowing on her cheekbone. But her eyes were the same, fierce, determined. "Not yet," he whispered. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal." She glanced over her shoulder. "You need to go. If they find you, I'm not leaving without you. Any of you." Clara shook her head. "There are hundreds of prisoners here, and Captain Briggs runs this place like a fortress." "Briggs? From Devil's Crossing?" "The same. He got promoted for capturing me. Now he's in charge of this labor redistribution center." The bitterness in her voice was sharp as a blade. "They're selling freedom back to us, Josiah, making us work years to earn what's already ours. Tell me about the camp. How many guards? Where do they keep weapons?" She hesitated. "You can't be thinking of fighting them. There's at least 30 soldiers, plus Briggs and his lieutenants. I've faced worse odds. Not like this." She reached through the slats, her fingers brushing his. "Just go north. Tell people what's happening here. That would help more than—" "Nobody's listening up north," Josiah cut in. "They think the war solved everything." The guard's footsteps approached. Josiah pressed deeper into the shadows. When the sentry passed, he whispered, "Tomorrow night. Be ready." He spent the next day watching, listening, planning. The camp operated with mechanical precision. Prisoners were woken at dawn, fed, then marched to fields or workshops. Guards changed shifts at noon and dusk. The armory was a small building near the officers' quarters, locked but lightly guarded. Most important, Josiah discovered the munitions shed behind the armory. Kegs of gunpowder were stored there for the camp's small cannon, used to intimidate new arrivals. That night, Josiah moved through the barracks, whispering to men he judged trustworthy. "Tomorrow at dawn. Be ready." Spread the word. Some looked at him like he was crazy. Others nodded, hope flickering in their eyes for the first time in months. In the darkest hour before morning, Josiah broke into the munitions shed. He created a simple fuse from lamp oil and cotton rope, running it beneath the building. Then he crept to the armory, picking the lock with a nail he'd straightened. Inside he found rifles, pistols, ammunition, enough to arm 20 men. He distributed the weapons to those who'd agreed to help, instructing them to hide until they heard the explosion. Just before dawn, as the guards prepared for the morning roll call, Josiah lit the fuse. The blast shook the entire camp. The munitions shed erupted in flames, sending guards running toward it. In the chaos, Josiah's men broke out, shooting at anyone in uniform. Prisoners poured from the barracks, overwhelming the confused guards. Josiah ran for the women's pen, shooting the lock off the gate. "Clara!" she emerged, leading the others. "This way!" she shouted, guiding them toward the gate that now stood unguarded. Amid the shouting and gunfire, Josiah headed for the officers' quarters. He kicked open the door to find Captain Briggs buckling on his gun belt. "You!" Briggs snarled. Josiah fired, but Briggs dove aside. The bullet splintered the wall behind him. Briggs drew his own pistol, squeezing off a shot that grazed Josiah's arm. They crashed together, grappling for control. Briggs was heavier, stronger, but Josiah fought with desperate fury. They tumbled through the doorway onto the dirt yard outside, now illuminated by the growing fire. Briggs landed a punch that sent Josiah sprawling. He drew a knife from his boot. "You should have stayed dead, boy." Dawn broke over the bayou, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Smoke hung in the air like morning fog, drifting between cypress trees whose knees rose from the shallow water. The smell of burned wood and gunpowder clung to everything. Clara walked at the front of the group, her skirt torn and muddy, her journal clutched against her chest. Beside her, Josiah moved with the slow, careful steps of a wounded man. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, but he refused to stop. Behind them stretched a ragged line of freed people, nearly 200 souls who had awakened in chains yesterday, and now walked as free men and women. Children clung to their mothers' hands. Old men leaned on walking sticks cut from saplings. They moved quietly, afraid that speaking might break the spell of freedom. "We need to rest soon," Clara said, glancing at Josiah's wound. He shook his head. "Not yet. There's a creek up ahead where we can refill water jugs. Then we push north another 5 miles to the river landing. You've lost too much blood." Josiah's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed his pain. "Lost more than that," he muttered. They reached the creek by mid-morning. As the people knelt to drink and fill containers, a young boy ran back from his position as lookout. "Riders coming," he gasped. "Blue coats." Josiah climbed a small rise and peered south. Clara joined him, shading her eyes against the sun. On the horizon, a line of blue uniforms moved steadily toward them, at least 30 mounted soldiers. "Union reinforcements," Josiah said grimly. "Word travels fast." Clara's heart sank. "They'll catch us before we reach the river." "Not if they're chasing someone else." Josiah turned to her, his decision already made. "Take them north. Follow the creek until it meets the river. There's a landing where barges stop for timber. One should arrive by nightfall." Clara grabbed his arm. "You're coming with us. I'll slow them down, draw them west, give you time." "That's suicide, Josiah." He looked at her with those deep, haunted eyes that had seen too much suffering. "What's waiting for me up north, Clara? More chains, just with different names. A chance to live," she insisted, "to become something besides a weapon." Josiah's expression softened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden disc, the one Ruth had carved for him years ago. "Keep this," he said, pressing it into her palm, "and tell them what you saw. Not just the blood and fire. Tell them about the people who walked free." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I need you alive to tell your own story." "My story's done." He looked back at the distant soldiers. Theirs is just beginning. He whistled for his horse, a bay stallion he'd taken from the camp. As he mounted, wincing from his wound, the freed people gathered around him. An old man reached up to touch Josiah's boot. "God keep you, brother." Josiah nodded. "Keep each other. That's what matters now." He turned to Clara one last time. "Tell them what you saw," he repeated. Before she could answer, he spurred his horse, galloping back the way they'd come. He fired his pistol into the air 3 times, a signal the soldiers couldn't miss. Clara watched him grow smaller in the distance, a lone rider disappearing into the drifting smoke. The soldiers on the horizon changed course, following his path instead of theirs. "Come," she said to the waiting people, her voice thick with emotion. "We need to reach the river before dark." They walked all day, following the creek as it widened and deepened. The youngest children rode on the shoulders of stronger men. The oldest were supported between friends. No one complained, though hunger and exhaustion marked every face. By late afternoon, they heard the distant sound of Union rifles. Clara paused, listening to the sporadic gunfire. Each shot made her flinch. "He's still leading them away," a woman said softly. Clara nodded, unable to speak. She urged the group forward with renewed urgency. As twilight descended, they emerged from the woods to find the wide Mississippi before them. The landing was just as Josiah had described, a simple wooden platform extending into the water. And approaching from upstream was a barge loaded with timber, its steam whistle announcing its arrival. They waited in the shadows until the barge docked. Clara approached the captain, explaining their situation and offering what little money she had. The gruff old riverboat man looked at the ragged group of freedmen, then nodded curtly. "I don't much care for the government telling me who I can transport," he said. "Get aboard quick." As they climbed onto the barge, a rider appeared at the edge of the trees. Clara's heart leaped, but it was a Union lieutenant, not Josiah. His uniform was dusty, his horse lathered with sweat. "The fugitive known as Josiah Holt," he announced. "Did he pass this way?" Clara stepped forward. "No. We haven't seen anyone." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "We lost him in the bayou, chased him into a burning section of marsh." He held up a battered hat, Josiah's. "Found this, and this." He produced a scorched wooden plank with roughly carved letters. "Justice rides at dawn." "No body?" Clara asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Not yet, but no man could survive those flames." The lieutenant studied the group. "You're all free to go north. The war's over. But remember, justice comes from courts now, not vigilantes." After he rowed away, the barge cast off, its paddle wheel churning the muddy water. Clara stood at the rail, watching the shore recede. In her hand, she held the wooden sign the lieutenant had carelessly tossed aside. Night fell as they moved upriver. Most of the freed people slept, huddled together for warmth. Clara remained awake, staring at the distant shore, where lights occasionally twinkled from homesteads. An elderly woman joined her at the rail. "He ain't dead," she said simply. Clara touched the carved letters on the sign. "How can you be sure?" "Men like him don't die. They become something else." The woman looked up at the stars. "Something that can't be killed by bullets or fire." Clara clutched the wooden disc Josiah had given her. On it was carved a simple rising sun. "He's not gone," she whispered, more to herself than to the woman. "He's everywhere. They still fear justice." The barge continued northward, carrying its precious cargo toward a freedom still being born. 10 years later, 1875, Boston. The lecture hall at the Athenaeum was filled to capacity. Every polished wooden seat occupied by ladies in fine wool dresses and gentlemen with neatly trimmed beards. Gas lamps cast a golden glow over the audience, many of whom leaned forward in anticipation as Clara Green closed the leather-bound volume in her hands. "And so ended the campaign of Josiah Holt," she said, her voice steady and clear. a man who freed over 500 souls and vanished into the smoke of his final battle. Clara looked different now. At 39, gray streaked her once dark hair at the temples. She wore a simple black dress with a lace collar, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. But her eyes still burned with the same intensity that had driven her to document Josiah's story all those years ago. His body was never found, she continued. Only his hat and a wooden sign remained, bearing the words that had become his signature. "Justice rides at dawn." The audience erupted in applause. Some rose to their feet, while others remained seated, whispering skeptically to their neighbors. Clara had expected this reaction. For 10 years, she had faced the same division: those who believed her account and those who dismissed it as myth-making. "I open the floor to questions," she said, setting the book down on the podium. A gray-haired abolitionist stood first. "Miss Green, your memoir paints Holt as both hero and monster. Do you believe his methods were justified?" Clara considered this carefully. "I believe a world that creates monsters cannot complain when they bite. Josiah was born in chains. His sister died in them. The world taught him violence, and he turned that lesson back upon his teachers." Another hand rose, a Union veteran with an empty sleeve pinned to his chest. "I served with colored troops," he said. "Brave men all. But your account claims Holt killed Union soldiers. How can we celebrate a man who murdered those who fought for freedom?" "The war ended," Clara replied, "but not all chains were broken. Some were simply renamed as labor contracts and Reconstruction agreements. Josiah fought not just against slavery, but against all its disguises." The questions continued for nearly an hour. Some praised her courage in telling such a confrontational story. Others questioned her facts, her motives, even her morality for glorifying violence. Clara answered each with the practiced patience of someone who had defended her truth for a decade. As the crowd began to disperse, a young man approached her, notebook in hand. He couldn't have been more than 20, with eager eyes and ink-stained fingers. "Frederick Douglass Porter, Boston Chronicle," he introduced himself. "Miss Green, may I ask you something directly? Did Josiah Holt really die in that swamp? Or is that merely how you chose to end your story?" Clara gathered her papers slowly, buying time to consider her answer. Outside the tall windows, twilight had fallen over Boston Common, the first gaslights flickering to life along the paths. "Young man," she said finally, looking up at him with a faint smile, "freedom doesn't die. It just changes its name." "That's not an answer," he pressed. "It's the only one I have to give." She closed her satchel. "The last chapter of Josiah's life belongs to him alone. My task was to ensure the 500 souls he freed would not be forgotten." The reporter seemed unsatisfied but nodded respectfully. As Clara made her way toward the exit, attendees stopped her to request signatures in their copies of her memoir. She obliged each one, though her hand grew tired. Near the door, a young black man in a porter's uniform approached her. "Package for you, Miss Green," he said quietly, handing her a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "From whom?" Clara asked, turning it over. There was no return address, only her name written in a hand she didn't recognize. "Don't know, ma'am. Man paid me to deliver it. Didn't give his name." Clara thanked him with a coin and tucked the package into her satchel. She would examine it later, away from curious eyes. The evening air was cool as she stepped outside. Gas lamps illuminated the brick sidewalks, and horse-drawn carriages clattered past. Boston seemed so orderly, so civilized, worlds away from the burning plantations and makeshift swamp camps of Josiah's war. In her small apartment above a bookshop, Clara lit the lamp on her writing desk and finally opened the mysterious package. The paper fell away to reveal a small wooden box, crudely made but solid. Her heart quickened as she lifted the lid. Inside lay 2 items: The first was a rusted Union bullet, the kind fired from an Army-issue Colt revolver. The second was a scrap of cloth, once white, but now yellowed with age. On it, someone had carefully embroidered 5 words in red thread. "Justice rides at dawn." Clara's hands trembled as she touched the bullet. Was it one of those fired at Josiah that final day? Or one he had carried all these years? She sat heavily in her chair, memories washing over her, the smoke-filled bayou, the freed people boarding the barge, Josiah riding away into gunfire and flame. Had he somehow survived? Outside her window, church bells tolled 9 times. Clara carefully returned the items to their box, then opened her desk drawer. From it, she removed the wooden disc Josiah had pressed into her palm 10 years ago, the one with the rising sun carved into it. She placed it beside the new keepsakes. "Wherever you are," she whispered, "I kept my promise. I told their stories. I told yours, far to the south, where spring came earlier and the air hung heavy with humidity. A man rode through the ruins of what had once been a prosperous plantation. He was a slave catcher by trade, though nowadays they called themselves labor agents or contract enforcers. Business remained good despite the war's end. His horse snorted nervously as they passed the burned-out shell of a grand house. Vines had reclaimed most of the structure, but the stone steps still led to nowhere. The man paused, noticing something strange, a wooden sign nailed to a massive live oak tree. Fresh, not weathered like the ruins around it. He dismounted and approached cautiously, hand on his pistol. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.